Let's talk about the evolution of cologne fragrances today, shall we? Let's talk about how it all started, how it evolved with time, and where we are at this current time. But before we do, you know that I'm George, the nice medic gentleman, and it's time for your dose of some fragrance content. When I started being interested into fragrances all those years ago, probably 25 years or maybe even more than 25 years ago, there weren't that many choices back then, at least for me personally, where I lived in Eastern Europe. Basically, you could go in either of two roads. You can go in the road of wearing something very cheap, very generic, like something like a deodorant spray or something like that. Or the other choice was basically wearing something from a designer brand, let's say something from the brand of Dior. Not exactly the OG Savage, because this wasn't available 25 years ago, but I'm just showing you a designer bottle just to give you a sort of a reference point. So that was it. We didn't have that many options. But then probably around about 10-15 years ago, maybe even a little bit more than that, some new thing started to emerge, and that new thing was called cologne brands or cologne fragrances. Now initially, those very first cologne fragrances that were available on our markets again was something very generic, and I'm going to give you a very quick example of that. What I'm holding in my hand here is a cologne fragrance that comes from a brand that's called Rayhaan. I think it's quite popular in Eastern Europe, and if I'm not mistaken, I think it's a company that comes from the brand from the country of Poland. I might be mistaken, but basically that was my first sort of contact, my first experience with cologne fragrances. Initially, they came packaged in very generic looking bottles like this one, very plasticky, very cheap feeling, and the fragrance inside is also very cheap feeling. This particular one is a clone of Bleu de Chanel EDT, and it smells somewhat similar to the original fragrance, but the overall experience that you get out of something like this is pretty disappointing, I would say, especially if you have a little bit more experience with more serious stuff like, let's say, designer fragrances or niche fragrances. But basically back then this was our only option. Now with time, even brands like Rayhaan, who still exist to this day, they started to evolve, they started to include better packaging and all that, but still this was my very first very early contact with cologne fragrances. Then over the years, in the past 5 or 10 years, that market was entered by the cologne brands or cologne manufacturers from the Middle East, and that's when we started to see the first sort of good cologne fragrances. And just a very simple example that I've included in today's video comes from the brand of Armaf. We started seeing a little bit better looking bottles, although still the build quality wasn't great. For example, I don't know if you can see, but this I can pretty much peel off this plastic part of the bottle if I want. But this one, for example, had a magnetic cap. Maybe not the strongest magnets in the world, but still a magnetic cap. This particular one is called Signature Night. It comes from the brand of Armaf, and this one is a clone of Bulgari's Men in Black. And this is like a fresher clone of Men in Black, and this actually is a very nice hidden gem from the brand of Armaf that's been around for quite a while, but has never been that popular. So when Middle Eastern brands started to enter this space of cologne fragrances, they started to offer a little bit better packaging, a little bit better quality of the scent and the ingredients used inside, fragrances that actually started to smell a lot closer to the original inspirations, to their original inspirations, and overall they started to build on that popularity. They started to gain popularity as well, and they started to build quite a bit of reputation and popularity over the years, and that's how that trend of cologne fragrances started to appear. And nowadays we have something that's actually a lot better than even this. But again, there are two ways that, for example, especially Middle Eastern brands, they sort of approach the markets. On one hand, we have fragrances and brands that try to do strictly clones. They try to imitate the original fragrance as much as possible when it comes to both the scent, the actual scent, and also the packaging. I'll give you an example here from the brand of Fragrance World, which is called Oud Madness. And if you are sort of aware of the original fragrance that this one has been inspired by, which is called Oud Morocco from Maison Crivelli, you can definitely notice that the bottle looks a lot like the original fragrance. The whole packaging also looks a lot like the original fragrance, and the scent itself as well smells a lot like the original fragrance. So now we are getting into a territory where the clone fragrances, the quality is really good. but also they try to copy completely the original scents, packaging, bottle design and everything else. Something that I don't really like, but that's one of the approaches that some Middle Eastern brands are doing. And then you get what's like the more higher end stuff that nowadays has been selling by Middle Eastern brands. For example, you can look at stuff like the Pride line of Latafa, Niche Emirati, again a higher end line of Latafa fragrances. You can check out stuff like, you can look at the stuff like French Avenue, which is the more upper sort of a higher end line of fragrances from Fragrance World. French Avenue is a brand of Fragrance World, or stuff like Arabiat Prestige, for example. And I've just included a simple example of from the brand of Arabiat Prestige, just to see and to sort of put in basically to show you you know, the long road that we've walked starting from this very generic and plasticky looking bottle with very low quality of the scent and the overall build quality, and we've gotten to a point where we have fragrances like this one, which has very nice packaging, very lavish presentation, very luxurious, that looks better than most even most designer and niche fragrances. You get magnetic edges and stuff like that. You get bottles that look more like a piece of art than actual fragrance bottles. You get pressurized sprayers as well, like this one for example, and even the quality of the scent, the overall quality of the ingredients and everything that's being used you know, is so high nowadays, and so much higher than compared to anything that we got 5, 10, 15 years ago. So this is the long path of sort of an improvement that you know, cologne fragrances have walked from the beginning to what we have nowadays. Yes, they are a little bit more expensive nowadays. For example, something like this from the brand of Arabiat Prestige nowadays costs like 50-60 euros, so it's almost half the price of a designer fragrance. But at the end of the day, you're getting pretty much designer level quality out of the higher end you know, cologne fragrance brands from the Middle East. And this really shows you know, the long road, as I said, of improvement that you know, cologne fragrances have had to walk over the past 5 to 10 years. And now we are at a point where cologne fragrances, some of them have really nice quality when it comes to the whole presentation, when it comes to the scent, when it comes to how close they are to the original fragrances that they have been inspired by, and by just the overall feeling that you get when you're buying a high-end Middle Eastern cologne fragrance. So we've come to a point where cologne fragrances, especially high-end cologne fragrances from the Middle East, have become immensely popular on the Western markets, and more people are buying them, more and more people are experiencing them, more and more people get impressed by them, and that's me including as well. In the past few years, you know, I've been really impressed with the evolution of cologne fragrances, especially the ones from the Middle East. And so guys, in today's video I tried to quickly talk about and show you the evolution of cologne fragrances in the past 10, 15 to 20 years. I hope that you found today's video interesting to watch. If you did, give it a like, and I also hope that you're going to join me in my next video for your dose of some fragrance content. And until then, stay safe and bye bye.